Hello everyone and welcome back to The Games Must Go On, the only series where what goes up must not come down, because then it would hit the ground and that's against the rules. Today I'm going to be trying to beat New Super Mario Bros. U without touching the ground, so let's get right into the rules. A little while ago, Nathaniel Bandy and Nika BBQ tried their own Groundless challenge that used boost blocks to stay off the floor, but my version's a little bit different where I'm going to be focusing on level objects instead. To be exact, in this run I'm going to be using things like pipes, blocks, semi-solids, and moving platforms to stay off the ground. But what exactly is ground? Well, my personal definition is that ground is anything that would be made out of ground or slope tiles in Mario Maker, which means if it has any sort of property, it would probably be made out of something else and is perfectly allowed. Because this game is easier than New Super Mario Bros. Wii, which I also tried this challenge on, I'm also going to be banning a few other things. First is obviously boost blocks, as it would be kind of redundant with Nathaniel and Nico's video existing, and another couple of things that are banned are P acorns and baby Yoshis, as flying over the levels would be too easy. One last thing to note is that upon starting a level and exiting both doors and pipes, I'm placed upon the ground, and when this happens I will have immunity until I enter freefall. Also, obviously this carries over to the action of entering a pipe or door too, but with all that being said, we have a lot of levels to cover, so let's go. We start off in 1-1 with almost immediate access to the acorn suit, as well as a nice platform to pick it up on. This level is filled to the brim with platforms to jump between, so we can beat it relatively quickly, which is good because whenever I took damage I was basically forced to either beat the level again for more acorn suits or reset from my last save point. Once we get access to a castle or tower, we'll gain the ability to save by recompleting that level. But for now, all we can do is just recomplete 1-1 for more acorn suits if we fail the next couple of levels. Hopefully they aren't too bad. Anyway, 1-2 starts with this. I believe at this point the developers are trying to tell me to touch the ground. Unfortunately, I'm a master of two things. 1, plugging my ears, and 2, multiplayer. So it is time to pull out another controller to show off the most important strat of a run. Just like in New Super Mario Bros. Wii, you can press a button to put a player into a bubble. While this bubble doesn't have any direct collision with anything besides other players, allowing it to pass through walls, this isn't very useful because it can't make any tangible progress until the player breaks out of her bubbly prison by locating their mustachioed pal, or by using the gamepad. While I banned boost blocks in my rule set, any other function of the gamepad is perfectly kosher, including abusing the bubble mechanics to phase Luigi through the wall to then pop him out on the other side using a tap from the gamepad. While this trick seems like a get-out-of-jail-free card for any difficult platforming, the movement patterns of the bubbles are random and have a preference for moving towards the center of the screen, meaning RNG has to be on your side to get any success. Also, because bubbled players are intangible to the universe, they don't scroll the camera, giving them a fixed range of maximum movement. Either way, the bubble trick is just the thing we need to get through this level, as I had to use it to get past this tight gap, and because I took some damage near the end, I used it to get into this pipe right here. But hey, with that, we are done with the second level. Our next level is 1-Tower, which means after we beat it, we'll be able to save. Unfortunately, the level isn't quite as friendly as I hoped, as well it definitely takes a step back from 1-2 in terms of difficulty, mostly due to all the gears around. This jump right here to a launch pipe is pretty scary. As for Boom Boom, as long as you have your acorn suit, he isn't that bad. 1-3 is pretty easy, as while we can't get the Yoshi's present, there are plenty of rolling hills to jump between, and the only part that really stands out is that in order to get to the checkpoint I use some more bubble shenanigans. 1-4 is the easiest level yet, as the entire stage is made out of mushroom platforms, and 1-Castle isn't much harder as there are plenty of bridge platforms as well as swinging platforms to jump between. Because this level is so easy, after almost every other level I would come back to it to save my progress, as there was almost no risk. The only slightly scary thing is that we have to defeat Lemmy while airborne, but the acorn suit makes quick work of that challenge. World 2 doesn't do much to change up the difficulty, as the entire world is full of semi-solids. The only part that really stood out was after the checkpoint in 2-2, we actually have to die in order to be able to equip a star so we can blast through the enemies in the next section. Besides that, the platforming was honestly pretty trivial. Even the worst of it in 2-Castle wasn't that bad, meaning we can head off to World 3, Sparkling Waters. This world has a little bit to talk about. While it isn't as hard as World 1, there are some tight spots, like hitting this P-switch under the ceiling and avoiding touching the ground from the recoil. Another tight spot is in 3-Castle, as the passageways are pretty narrow. The The world does have one more interesting level, that being the ghost house, as in order to get through it I decided to abuse the immunity I get from entering a door in tandem with a mini mushroom. By running up the walls, I can keep my immunity through the majority of this room, and I was even able to get one of the star coins by using multiplayer. I decided to take on World 4 next, even though we could technically move straight on to World 5, just because I wanted to give every world a fair shot. Some levels in this world were even a little easier than expected, as they were entirely made out of ice. While you could argue that ice is ground because of a Night Snow theme in Mario Maker 2, in that game when you apply the Night Snow theme, everything becomes slippery, including things like blocks and pipes, while in New Soup, only specific sections of the ground are ice. While this would have made the world relatively uneventful, because of a tower I actually had to start using a new strategy, and because I started using this strat in Frosted Glacier's tower, I decided to call the strat Ice Climbers for the rest of the game. As for what the strat actually was, it was essentially an extension of the bubble mechanics from 1-2, except instead of just popping out of your bubble and trying to make it to your destination, you instead pop out of your bubble, move a little bit in the air, and then re-bubble yourself, rinse and repeat. By using this strat, we can cover large gaps such as the upward slopes in 3-Tower, but while this technique does allow us to get huge amounts of distance, we are still limited by the player that doesn't bubble that we use as an anchor, because if they go off screen and die, we'll die as soon as we bubble again. In the castle, in order to get to the checkpoint, I actually had to use ice climbers in a precarious spot. That being, I had to use it while our anchor Luigi was on his flint pad. It should be noted that I'm not counting the flint pad as ground because it has the property of always having a flint land on it, along with its distinguished look from the level's typical tile set. This section was probably the hardest in the whole of World 4, but it was definitely clearable. The only thing left in World 4 after grabbing the checkpoint is using a mini mushroom to abuse immunity after leaving this pipe and defeat Wendy. Nothing really stands out in World 5 as the blocks that we can stand on are supersized, making the platforming pretty easy. World 6 though is a bit harder, as in level 2 we have to avoid the Porcupuffer and ground by bouncing on Miss Koopa. In the first tower we have to use bubble shenanigans in order to clip through the low walls, and in level 5 we have to do some pretty tight jumps. The mini boss in the second tower is a bit janky as well. One thing that wasn't just as simple as getting good at video games was the Roy boss fight, as after hitting him he goes into his shell and all of the platforms disappear. And because there are no walls, we can't just stall with the acorn suit. This makes Roy an actual threat, and one of the hardest bosses in the game. Roy is not impossible though, as we start the fight with immunity, and by positioning Mario on the very edge of the platform and attacking with Luigi Magic Window style, we can land cheap hits on Roy without his shell being able to hit us. World 7 is up next, and it's about as easy as you would expect for a Sky World. However, there are a few interesting things. First of all, in level 6, after finishing a long snake block level, we are forced to do some bubble shenanigans while clinging onto a wall for dear life. Also, Ludwig von Koopa has the same boss arena as Roy, so we have to set Mario aside with his immunity again. The last thing to note is that the airship after the castle features a lot of unavoidable quote-unquote ground, through a long, slow, auto-scroller section. However, this ground is not actually ground, but hard blocks in disguise, as they can be destroyed by the giant Bowser Fist of Death. With that, we are finally at the final world, World 8, and besides some cramped spaces we have to use ice climbers to get past in 8-3, honestly this world was as easy as the rest. I guess I should probably mention the final Bowser fight though, as we're supposed to use the clown car to damage Bowser before landing back on the ground. But first we have to get past the first phase and the entrance hall. Because the entrance hall is so uneven and entirely made out of ground, you might expect it to be pretty tough to get past. However, we can just equip the mini mushroom in order to keep our immunity from the door. We can even pop incoming fireballs with the gamepad. For Bowser's first phase, I actually sacrificed Mini Mario because he's not going to be useful anymore, and instead I decided to bring in Fire Luigi to hit the switch. As for the second phase, by bringing in Fire Luigi, we can actually use that immunity that we got from all the cutscenes and screen transitions to stay on the ground and pelt Bowser with fireballs while protecting Luigi with the gamepad. It's kinda funny to think, but in the Groundless challenge, the best way to beat the final boss is to never leave the ground in the first place. Anyways, that is the first half of the game because now we have star coins to collect, as I'm going for 100%. While I did pick up quite a few star coins on the way to finishing any percent, I decided to save most of them along with some optional levels until I finished the main campaign, because now I can actually save my game anywhere I want, not just from beating a castle level, which really saves some time. Just because I didn't collect a bunch of star coins doesn't mean they were all difficult, as most of the ones I missed were only avoided because they were a little out of the way or required some multiplayer tomfoolery to reach. That isn't to say that all the coins were cakewalks though, as one type of coin was particularly painful. These were the coins directly below semi-solids or bridges. Unlike most coins where I just had to get lucky with the multiplayer bubbles and just hope that they drifted over to the star coin so I could pop them out and collect it, when I pop a player out under a bridge, they'll just land on top of it without actually collecting the coin due to intangibility frames. This means for all of these coins, I have to perfectly time a ground pound to avoid clipping above the bridge, and then time a rebubble that is early enough to not touch the ground, but late enough to still collect the star coin. This isn't the hardest thing to do in a run, but it's annoying enough where it made sense to wait until now to do them. Other than that, there are 4 levels to talk about. The first of these is 1-2. In particular, the problem is getting to the level secret exit. You see, the problem is that first we have to get to the top portion of a level. However, I figured out you can get there by using a Koopa shell by bouncing it up to the top of the gamepad before bouncing on it with a mini mushroom. Once we reach this crystal, we need to go above the level, where I have a question. Are these 2 tile blocks ground? They don't have a unique property, but they don't fit in with the typical tile set the level uses. If you think these aren't ground, good news, you can just walk across the ceiling before releasing your Luigi. I, however, am not satisfied, so I decided to find a way to get around this too. Unfortunately, because I needed some cognitive multiplayer instead of just double the controllers, and I didn't have access to anyone at the time, I decided to splice this section. In order to skip the double blocks, the first thing that we're going to need is an extra Koopa shell up here. Then we can escort both Koopas to the crystal. Next, we can take a Koopa and yeet it up here, before using a blind jump to move the camera enough so we can actually tap the Koopa to get up to this left lip. Now that the Koopa is on the left lip, we can continuously bounce on it while moving the other Koopa with the gamepad all the way to the right side of the gap. From here, it's just a matter of moving Mario to the other Koopa when it wakes up, and bouncing on it till the pipe. The next tough level is 4-Flipperus, where there's a star coin above the ceiling across a huge piece of ground. While going under it and using the bubble mechanics might have been viable, I decided to use the ice flower for the first time in this run, freeze the Koopa shell and then stand on it with Luigi, and then have Mario throw it on a magical journey. While 6-6 isn't that hard, it's actually pretty easy. To get to the third star coin, I actually used a little trick. While normally you're supposed to use an invincibility start across these munchers, I instead used ice climbers with my Luigi anchor on the second bone coaster that's actually hidden off screen. I'm honestly just surprised standing on it doesn't trigger it. The last level is 8-4, Firefall Cliffs, and this one's trouble because of the auto-scroll. Throughout this challenge, I have been taking heavy advantage of ice climbers. However, while they can give you immense distance, it isn't particularly fast or consistent. While there have been a couple of other levels with auto-scroll, they've had plenty of places to stand. Firefall Cliffs has tons of falling boulders, along with limited blocks to stand on, and a decently paced auto-scroll speed. But not even that is really impossible to deal with. What is impossible to deal with is this section with no blocks to stand on. I mean, as you can see, there is clearly nothing here. Or is there? While there doesn't seem to be anything here, and obviously boost blocks are still banned, there is something that lets us survive. That being this random moon block that has a 30% chance of spawning here. By existing in a universe where this spawns, we can actually stand on top of it and use it as a platform. Just to note, even if we are lucky and it does spawn, we still have to actually platform to it and then use ice climbers to make it up farther. This is not an easy section, even if we have luck on our side. That being said, it is possible, and besides a few other tight jumps here and there, no other levels really pose much of a threat in terms of star coins, meaning it's time to wrap up with World 9. Honestly, most of World 9 is just as easy as the base game, the only exception being 9-6. This level features tons of ground and tight passageways, one of which requires us to slip through right after using ice climbers to grab a star coin in a pit. About halfway through the level, we need to actually bring in Blue Toad, as he has a propeller mushroom which allows him to get to this donut block before us needing to get lucky with one of the Mario Bros going to the left. While nothing in this level is impossible, in terms of overall execution difficulty, this level beats out every other level by a long shot. I mean, even if this level was just tight platforming, it might already be the hardest in the game, but I haven't even mentioned the fact that there are deadly fire bars everywhere. After a couple of hours, I was eventually able to beat it, but I only had about 12 Mario seconds remaining. But with that, New Super Mario Bros. U is possible without touching the ground. But while we're here, I guess I should also cover New Super Luigi U because of its similar style. While the game is very similar to Mario U in a lot of ways due to it sharing assets in an engine, Luigi U is on a different level from Mario U's difficulty, but that's because it's significantly easier. There are definitely a couple of tough levels and sections in Luigi U, but most of the problems are just the same as their Mario U counterpart. For instance, fighting Roy is just as bad, but yet just as possible in both games. The game is only made easier by a couple of other things that Luigi U does differently from Mario U. While the gimmick of only having 100-second levels might seem bad, the levels are so short this isn't an issue. Instead, now we just have short levels that have less space to throw a wrench in our path. It should also be noted that the seconds in Luigi U are actual seconds, opposed to the shorter Mario seconds found in Mario U, so we have more time than you might expect. Another benefit in Luigi U is that the levels heavily focus on gimmicks that we can stand on. While in Mario U there were gimmicks in each level, in Luigi U several levels are entirely made up of gimmicks, leaving no room for ground to avoid. The last big change is that we're playing with Luigi's physics instead of Mario's, which means our jump height is even higher, making gaps even easier to cross, and alternatively we can even play as Nabbit if the level's platforming is easy enough, which will give us invincibility. This isn't to say that the game is free, as there are definitely some sections that test our dexterity with the bubble mechanics. To list off a few sections, in 1-2, to get to the secret exit, we have to get under these hidden brick blocks to start using ice climbers, and then we have to go for this tight little passageway, and after that we can reach the pipe. In 2-2, to get to the first star coin, we have to play chicken with the ground, as we have to get really close to this piece of ground to get the star coin to spawn before air boosting our way out of there. In 4-Ghost House, we need a place to stand for our anchor so we can use ice climbers to get to the first star coin and the secret exit. While we don't have anywhere solid normally, we can actually get a Mario block to spawn that is normally used to switch our physics over to Mario U physics, but here we can just use it as a platform. 4-Castle features a really tight jump from ice climbers to a dry bones and beyond, where we have to make sure our anchor Nabbit doesn't fall off the brick blocks after we start zooming to the right. In 5-Airship, we are subject to an auto-scroller with a star coin under a semi-solid that we have to ice climber to. Thankfully, an ice bro can freeze an enemy on top of a semi-solid which we can hit our head against to not require perfect timing, only slightly more precise positioning. 6-7 is one of the most claustrophobic levels, especially in terms of star coins, as there are several tight passageways we have to pass through with the mini mushroom. I even use a Koopa at one point to get to the second star coin. In 7-3, you're normally supposed to throw a PEL block to get a star coin, however, I decided to instead go up and collect the star coin myself before landing on the PEL block and use that as an anchor for some more ice climbers. In 9-2, in order to not get crushed to death from hitting this P-switch, we need 3 players. We use Yellow Toad as our anchor for ice climbers, we send Luigi over to the P-switch to press it, and we should immediately bubble, otherwise he'll hit the ground from pressing it. And lastly, we pop Blue Toad out of his bubble as soon as he's over the blocks falling, as Yellow Toad cosplays as a pancake. After we get up here, the level falls down in front of us, giving us a nice path of metal blocks to walk across. The last level we need to talk about is 9-6. While 9-6 back in Mario U was difficult for sure, it at least seemed possible. Luigi U though? Oh, it's a whole another level. The only things that we can stand on in the level are the 2 blocks at the beginning, this path of brick blocks, these 2 giant fire bars, and these brick blocks at the end. Needless to say, there isn't a lot to work with in this level, and it doesn't help that because it's based off of 9-6 from Mario U, this level is infested with giant fire bars. I probably don't need to say this, but the crampedness of this level cannot be understated. You are essentially playing with a quarter of your normal screen height for the entire level. So how far can we make it? Well, first we need to stretch our immunity to the ground to the maximum by having Nabbit as our anchor at the very beginning as we send Luigi out to the right. Even with our maximum distance though, we unfortunately cannot make it to the brick blocks as they're just too far away. There is one silver lining, however. That being in the pit we fall into, there is a beacon of hope as there is a chance that a free-up moon block will actually spawn here, giving us a platform to survive. After getting on top of that, we can get past the brick blocks to arrive at a massive ground-filled gap with enough fire bars to give me 4th-degree burns from just looking at them. Once again, we cannot make it to the next safe spot with a single acorn suit glide. And even if we could, timing it to not become barbecue would be pretty difficult. While it looks like we are beyond dead here, there might be one hope. One more. That being the tiny 1 block wide pits. In normal gameplay, these pits are meaningless, as you normally just run over top them at max speed. But for me, they are life and death, as by ground pounding, we can land inside of a pit, and by wall jumping, we can make a safe spot in mid-air. Because cognitive multiplayer is basically required unless I grow a couple of extra arms, I decided to splice the level to not waste my dad's time as he was available to handle the wall jumping, and it would be kind of rude to force him to try the first section over and over again due to the moon RNG. Even with splicing the level though, it is not easy. Even getting past this singular jump was almost impossible, and I was only able to do it once unscathed. And of course, by unscathed, I mean on fire and burning to death because we just landed on a fire bar, which is turning us into a seared Luigi steak, so we have to respawn Nabbit ASAP. Once he's spawned, we can grab another Toad with an acorn suit to just barely make it out of the cave into the last star coin and to the end of a level. But with that, I can officially say that it is not only possible to beat New Super Mario Bros. U without touching the ground, it is possible to 100% both New Super Mario Bros. U and New Super Luigi U without touching the ground. And finally, I would like to thank the channel members Harry Mario and Shellos Shellos. If you like this episode of The Games Must Go On, make sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons as they are not ground and as such you are allowed to touch them. Leave a comment on what challenges you'd like to see next, and with that I'd like to say thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Goodbye!